Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carla McCanders. I am the chair of the American Bar Association's Commission on Immigration. We're really excited to be here presenting a very timely webinar, Mobilizing Legal Resources for Haitians in a Time of Crisis, How the Legal Community Can Respond. This program is sponsored by the ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice and the Commission on Immigration. This panel is one of many in a series of rapid response webinars that are being planned by the American Bar Association, Civil Rights and Social Justice Commission, and the Commission on Immigration. Please visit americanbarassociation.org/CRSJ and the Commission's website for updates on these programs. Before we begin, we'd like to welcome the former ABA president, Judy Martinez, for introductory remarks.
Well, thank you, Carla, so much. And thank you for your leadership of the Commission on Immigration of the American Bar Association. And thanks to one of my sections, the Civil Rights and Social Justice section, for their continuing extraordinary work under Beth Wittenberg's leadership this year and their wonderful staff. I'm honored to join all of you to talk about this very important subject and crisis that's being faced by people in Haiti. I can't tell you, each time I look their way, whether it be looking at the country and its people after they suffered from 2 different earthquakes, the many hurricanes and storms that come through their path, the latest crisis with regard to the assassination of their president, and the problems they face on an ongoing basis of a lack of resources, legal resources, educational, and so much more. The things that we take for granted in the United States in so many ways. I know at the borders of California, the ABA's Immigration Justice Project is seeing a steady flow of Haitian refugees who are coming and in need of aid. And they need our pro bono help. The recent efforts to decrease the number of temporary status, protected status individuals from Haiti must be addressed at a policy level. But at the same time, the solution requires that we step up with pro bono help by lawyers, by paralegals, and others across this nation who can put some time in to help these neighbors of ours, of our country. I will tell you that I am a born and raised New Orleanian, and I still live here today. And there is no other evidence of what wonder and value and contribution that Haitians make than in my home city of New Orleans, a city that so many of you love and hold dear because of what it is. And that is in great part because of the influence of Haitians going back 200 years, when 10,000 Haitians, free and enslaved people, came to our area in New Orleans and made it their home. The influences on culture, on food, on art, on music, and so much more have made a difference for a city that so many of you across this nation love, who are gathered here for this webinar. So I ask you, if no one turned backs on them all those years ago, how can we possibly turn our backs on them now? And urge you to get involved and render pro bono aid as necessary for people coming from Haiti as refugees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy. Before we get started, I just wanted to address a couple of housekeeping matters. We encourage you to ask questions of our panelists through the Q&A function, not the chat function link in the in your Zoom platform. And if you don't see the controls, please ensure your screen is not idle, and we will address all of your questions at the end of the program when we have a devoted Q&A session. This program will also be recorded, so everyone who's registered can widely share it with your networks. I'm going to give a brief introduction of our panelists today, as we begin the panel by each of the panelists describing what they do in their respective organizations. So our first panelist is Christina Francois. She is the Executive Director of the Office of New Americans, MiamiDade. Gerline Joseph is the President of the Haitian Bridge Alliance. Nicole M. Phillips is the Legal Director of Haitian Bridge Alliance. And Adonia Simpson is the Director of Policy and Pro Bono at the American Bar Association's Commission on Immigration. So now I'll turn it over to our moderator, Aderson B. Francois, who is the Anne Fleming Research Professor and Professor of Law at the Georgetown University Law Center, where he directs the Institute for Public Representation in the Civil Rights Law Clinic. Thank you, Aderson.
Thank you very much, Carla. And thank you for the opportunity to moderate such a great panel, and welcome everyone. So let's get right to it. So let me start with you, Gerline, if you don't mind. And I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about your organization and the work in which you and your organization are engaged on behalf of Haitians.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having us. And on behalf of the Haitian community, we are grateful for ABA in the Civil Rights Social Justice section for putting this extremely timely and much needed panel together to discuss the need of the community. The Haitian Bridge Alliance is an organization that provides humanitarian assistance at the US-Mexico border. I must highlight that we are the only Black-led, the only Haitian-led organization providing support for all Black immigrants from the Caribbean and from Africa at the US-Mexico border. And the services we provide range from humanitarian assistance at the US-Mexico border, where we used to go once a month, but we had to switch because of COVID to direct cash assistance for the people there, to legal services, detention work. We started the first Black Immigrants Bail Fund last year on Juneteenth of 2020 as a result of the extremely high bond requests for Black immigrants between $50,000 to $80,000. And to date, we have paid over $1 million in bond for Black immigrants primarily, but for all immigrants. We also do direct services here in the country, and we continue to fight for a just immigration system for all people. We are glad that we were able to lead the fight with many of our colleagues, including people on this webinar, to win TPS for over 150,000 Haitians who are now eligible to be able to work and provide for their families and take care for themselves as they continue to deal with the extremely difficult immigration system. We continue to push through. It is with a heavy heart that we are here with you today as we are battling extreme political turmoil in Haiti, in addition to the earthquake that literally destroyed the entire southern side of the border of Haiti, leaving people extremely broken, trying to bury loved ones, trying to survive. Yet this morning, the United States of America found it necessary to deport asylum seekers to Haiti. So as we are talking right now, there is a plane that just landed in Haiti with asylum seekers in the middle of the political turmoil and the earthquake. So it is very timely that we continue to push for protections for all people, that we continue to make sure that we understand that immigration is a Black issue. We must continue to center the voices and narratives of people from Haiti, from Cameroon, from other majority Black-led countries, because if we don't do it, then who? So again, thank you so much for having us, and we'll continue to push through.
Thank you so much, Gerline. Nicole, if I may turn to you for just a moment. As the legal director of the organization that Gerline just described, can you give us perhaps a snapshot about some of the most significant legal initiatives that you undertake?
Sure, thank you so much. One of the biggest ones certainly is TPS, which I know Christina will talk about more too, but as 155,000 Haitians have received have been eligible for TPS effective August 3rd, we are trying to assist members of the community with TPS, but also assisting law schools around the country and legal practitioners who would like to assist with TPS clinics. We also work with detainees once they are detained, usually at crossing the US-Mexico border. They're detained in a number of detention centers, usually in Texas, but along the border. So we are the only, as far as I know, Creole speaking or legal organization that can speak with detainees in detention. We try and get them protection so they can have a credible fear interview, a screening for asylum, and can get released from detention and paired with an asylum attorney if they do have an asylum claim. We take some of those cases in-house, but many of them, Haitians will go to where their families are in Florida, Boston, around the country. We work with legal practitioners around the country to try and give legal strategy on how to win these asylum cases. We can talk about this more, but there is sort of this stereotype that Haitians are economic refugees and that they don't have asylum claims, and that's very untrue. We've won a lot of asylum claims on behalf of Haitians. So there's a lot about cultural competency, et cetera. So we provide that legal strategy, country conditions information, et cetera, so that practitioners can win their cases. Lastly, we do a lot of policy work to try and change these unfair policies that are affecting Black immigrants, in particular Haitians. TPS, of course, is a big win that many of us on the call together have worked for. But in addition, there are others. So we do a lot of white papers and sort of policy papers to try and present the evidence to the White House and others to change their policies.
Thank you, Nicole. Christina, if I may turn to you, can you tell us about your work?
Yes, so hi everyone. My name is Christina Francois, and I am the Executive Director of the Office of New Americans of Miami-Dade County. So we are a municipal initiative to help our more than 1.5 million immigrant residents who reside in Miami-Dade County, many of whom are Haitian. And we know that Miami-Dade County is home to more than 50% of the Haitian population residing in the United States. So this work is not only important to me personally as a Haitian American, but also really crucial for our residents. We provide free legal services in collaboration with local legal service providers like Catholic Legal Services, and Americans for Immigrant Justice, and the New Americans Campaign, primarily naturalization, but we also conduct DACA and TPS clinics. And we do a lot of community education around myth busting. So we know that misinformation and notario abuse are the two major challenges that we see for our immigrant community. And so we really work with local CBOs, elected officials, and other community leaders to make sure that we're getting the right information around eligibility, around documentation, around pricing, fees and fines and do's and don'ts to make sure that we can prevent any abuse of our community, and as well as being able to hold folks who are taking advantage of our community accountable through passing. We're currently working on passing anti-notario fraud legislation at the municipal level. And we also have a New Americans Fund where we are raising private dollars to be able to pay for application fees, because we know that the cost of immigration application fees, in addition to the legal service fees, are often a major barrier for members of our community. So I will stop there.
Thank you. It's a lot. So Adonia, as the Director of Policy and Pro Bono for the ABS Commission on Immigration, can you tell us where and how your work intersects with work on behalf of Haitians?
Absolutely. For those of you that may not be aware, the Commission on Immigration of the American Bar Association really does direct the ABA's response and efforts in regards to the fair treatment and due process for all immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. So this process and this work is very much informed by our on-the-ground projects. We have projects in San Diego as well as Harlingen that are working with individuals at the border and individuals who are detained. Many of those, as was already highlighted, are Haitian nationals who are in very much need of pro bono legal assistance. And pro bono is also very integral to the work that we do at the Commission on Immigration. We, from light touch as counsel and advice or clinics, which I'm really excited to say that the Commission is formally co-sponsoring and partnering with Christina and the Office of New Americans on their efforts on TPS, but also for individual case representation. And we'll be sharing some additional information about how those of you on this meeting, if you're interested in getting more involved, we urge you, whether it's the Commission on Immigration, whether it's Haitian Bridge Alliance, whether it's the Office of New Americans, there's so many amazing organizations and so much need. So I just encourage you to get involved.
Thank you, Adonia. So obviously we're about to dig more deeply into the current immigration situation regarding Haitians, but first, I have a sort of two initial sort of framing question for you, Gerline. And this framing question, I think you begin to touch upon the second at the beginning of your talk, in which you give a sense of what's currently going on right now in Haiti politically. But first, I was hoping you could give our audience a sort of brief historical overview of what drives and what has driven American immigration policy vis-a-vis Haiti.
Thank you so much, Anderson. And I want to highlight what Judy mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, importance of Haiti to the Americas, to the United States specifically. And I also want to highlight how Haitians has always been in the very fabric of the United States, from Jean-Baptiste Pointe du Sable, the founder of Chicago, to current elected officials, I believe over 86 local officials, to people like Edouard Dodzika and the work that Christina and all of us are doing, making sure that we as a people of Haitian descent continue to contribute to this United States of ours. For those who do not know, Haiti in the Caribbean is the second country to have won their independence in the Americas after the United States, fought the French army and literally won freedom on behalf of not only Haiti, all Black people, but humanity itself. So we do see and believe and continue to consider Haiti as the mother of the New World as we know it today. But with that comes a lot of a backlash as a new Black nation. How dare you? So we saw from the beginning, the powers at force made sure that Haiti did not prosper. In addition to that, we are seeing extreme political turmoil that has been going on in Haiti for years. And recently, the assassination of the Haitian president. But before that, if we are looking at immigration itself, Haitians really started to migrate to the United States in the 1970s as a result of a dictatorship under President Jovenel. And we saw very clearly at that time, both Haitians and Cubans were fleeing Haiti and Cuba to come and seek asylum to the United States. And we clearly understand that Haitians were the level of abuse that was inflicted upon the Haitian refugees compared to other nations continues to be. And at that time, they started putting Haitians in Guantanamo Bay, caging them at home in extremely subhuman conditions. And we saw that system that started with the Haitians gave birth to the new detention center that we see today. And we continue to see how anti-Black racism continues to guide the principles of laws and policies regarding immigration, but most of them have been tested upon the Haitian bodies, upon Haitian migrants, Haitian asylum seekers, Haitian refugees. So that a quick background on the historical fact as it relates to what Haiti is, who Haiti represents, and what has been happening to Black migrants in general, but specifically to Haitian migrants. And we saw the second, flow of Haitians coming by boat, and we hear the boat people and how that really impacted the Haitian American communities that, believe it or not, it wasn't until the Fugees, we all heard about Wycliffe and the Fugees, that Haitians in the United States were once again able to say we are Haitians because of the AIDS, 4H that they doomed upon Haitians as the carriers of AIDS, HIV/AIDS, in the 1980s, literally crippling our community to the fact that we were not even able to say that we are Haitians. So we see how internal violence and external violence continues to guide the principle upon which we base our system, whether it is just for immigration. And we have to make sure that we all understand the racial impact of immigration as a whole.
Thank you. Nicole, if I may turn to you, Galin mentioned both in her opening as well as in response to this most recent question, that there's been a great deal of social, economic, and political turmoil in Haiti. The two most prevalent and recent examples of which is the assassination of the president and the earthquake that recently hit the country. And our question then is that, how has this impacted migration patterns at the border as far as you're seeing right now? Is it the same or does it different? How are you seeing any patterns at all?
Right. Well, so most of the migrants that we're seeing coming through the US-Mexico border right now, they were part of a wave of migration that started right after the first earthquake in 2010. And a lot of migrants were able to get Haitians were able to get visas in Chile or Brazil at the time, in sort of the 2011 to 2015 range. And so went there, a couple 100,000. And then starting in about 2015 and 2016, those countries became extremely difficult, if not legally impossible, for Haitians to remain. There was not in addition to unemployment post World Cup, post Olympics in Brazil, the employment dried up. But also there was a lot of anti-Black racism, a lot of xenophobia, specifically against Haitian migrants, a lot of incidences of violence. And so Haitians left and started coming up to the US-Mexico border, largely by foot, on a journey that takes a couple of months, is extremely dangerous. We have interviewed hundreds, if not probably cumulatively, we've interviewed thousands of migrants who've taken this journey, and everybody has had somebody who's traveled with them die, including children and other close family members. It's a very, very dangerous journey. And it just goes to show you that Haitians make this choice, which is not even really a choice, to come to the US-Mexico border in search of safety and security because they don't feel like they can go back to Haiti. There's nothing for them in terms of security, et cetera. Many have faced, individual personal persecution, as well as just general violence there. So this is the choice, non-choice that they make to come up to the US-Mexico border. I do think that we are going to be seeing more waves of migration stemming from the assassination, the political turmoil, and this new earthquake. And I think it's going to be this route again. People will try and get into South America however they can, and then make their way up into the United States, where they feel that they will have security and safety and an opportunity to send their kids to school and find work and reunite with their family, sort of looking for the American dream. Unfortunately, that dream has been completely quelled by our immigration policies. And so through a series of immigration policies of starting in 2016, with the metering policy that was done in response to Haitians coming to the border, fleeing Brazil, Chile, Venezuela, that they were forced to wait in Mexico and take a number for when they could potentially file their asylum claim. Many had to wait months and months and months, and maybe not even, their number was never called. They were never allowed to file their asylum claim. Mexico is the border towns are controlled by cartels, are controlled by gangs. There's an influx of gangs because of the migration system that's been caused by U.S. immigration policies. And Black migrants, Haitian migrants stick out because they're Black. And so they are targets for exploitation, for violence, and it's very dangerous for them. So many of these asylum seekers have been waiting in our border for years. And then we had Title 42, which is a health code. Under the pretext of the coronavirus, President Trump closed the US-Mexico border. And so asylum seekers were not even allowed to file for asylum. They were just summarily deported back to Haiti without the opportunity to seek protection at all. So imagine going through this journey where you're losing family members and only to get to the US-Mexico border, only to not be able to even file for asylum, only to be held in custody for several weeks and then deported back to Haiti to these conditions that Geraldine mentioned. So it's really an injustice and something that Haitian Bridge Alliance since 2015 has been working around the clock to try and provide remedies on a structural basis through policy, but also individually trying to provide assistance to each and every individual that we can.
Thank you. Nicole, if I may, one quick follow-up or specific follow-up. I know that your organization, Geraldine's organization, issued a report recently with the UC Hastings Center for Gender and Refugee Studies. And can you give our audience a quick snapshot of the findings of your study, but focusing specifically on your findings as it relates to the challenges that Haitian women face at the border?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. So this report we issued along with the Center for Gender Refugee Studies, CGRS at Hastings, as well as IMUMI based in Mexico City. And the report we were in Tapachula and Chiapas on the border of Mexico and Guatemala. And we interviewed those migrants that were stuck. And so as you can imagine, this was in 2020 when we interviewed them. And the U.S. foreign policy is so linked with immigration policy. We won't get too much into U.S. foreign policy on Haiti, because that could be a whole seminar itself. But hand in hand, they go hand in hand. And so the U.S. government has put pressure on Mexico to quell migration up to the U.S.-Mexico border. And so the victims in our report were the women, Haitian women that were stuck at the border in Chiapas for several months, up to 8 or 10 months we found, where they're not given employment authorization, so they can't work. And so they're in pretty terrible conditions. There's nothing they can do. The Mexican immigration system, equivalent of USCIS, is backlogged, and we found that there was almost no interpretation into Haitian Creole for these asylum seekers. So they were forced to speak some broken Spanish that they didn't understand very well in order to defend their asylum claims. So it was just a really unjust system, and they weren't given the travel documents that they really should have gotten in order to get to the US-Mexico border, to get to where they were. So there was a number of human rights abuses from a legal perspective, but also from a humanitarian perspective. And a lot of that is a result of a fragile, sort of underdeveloped, racist Mexican immigration system. But a lot of that is also a result of pressure from the US government on that system to keep the migrants in Chiapas away from the US-Mexico border.
Thank you, Nicole. Daniel, let me turn to you as we sort of close this introductory section. I understand that your commission works directly at the border at the Otay Mesa detention facility. And based on the picture that both Nicole and Gorin has painted for us, it paints a very different picture than what is normally portrayed in the media, where most folks don't realize, in fact, that there are Haitians in the border. So what I wanted to ask you in terms of your own specific work, what types of Haitian cases does the ABA take on? And I wonder if you can tell us whether or not there are some specific issues that are particular to Haitian nationals when they are detained that your organization faces and tries to help with.
Absolutely. And I think Nicole and Garlene really did highlight some of the issues, particularly that many Black immigrants, asylum seekers at the border are invisible. When we talk about the border, these are individuals that are left out of the conversation. As you mentioned, the Commission on Immigration does have various projects at the border, including the Immigration Justice Project, which is based in San Diego. And we assist individuals who are detained, but also doing increasing work in non-detained, which I do want to talk about here shortly in relation to Haitian immigrants. For individuals who are detained, and Nicole hinted at this, there's a lot of preconceptions when it comes to Haitians seeking asylum and whether or not they have a cognizable claim, whether they've been persecuted. So right now, what we have a need for when it comes to pro bono at IJP is assistance with this credible fear interview process. Before somebody is able to take that next step and fully seek asylum at this time, they have to pass this interview, this credible fear interview. And oftentimes there's no orientation. Oftentimes immigrants aren't provided the tools to be able to articulate the basis of their fear, the reason that they have fled their home countries, the reason that they haven't sought protection in another country. So this is a huge need that we have right now. And I'm sure Nicole, similarly with Haitian Bridge Alliance, is also in need of volunteers to assist with this CFI preparation. So that is a big need. One of the challenges that was hinted at earlier was this issue of firm resettlement. We've seen a large number of Haitian immigrants who spent substantial time in Brazil as well as or Chile, and now are here and either seeking temporary protected status, TPS, or potentially asylum. And both of these programs do take into consideration whether or not you have firmly resettled in another country, which adds an additional layer of complexity and legal argument that's needed, and more reason that we need legal representation in these cases, because not only are you making a claim for temporary protected status or for asylum, you're also having to potentially rebut that there was any firm resettlement in one of these other countries, which I think we'll probably cover a little bit more later, so I don't want to go too far down that. But one other thing in regards to the non-detained, recently we saw a policy from the Executive Office of Immigration Review, the immigration court system, where they've created dedicated dockets. And these are in a lot of ways more rapid rocket dockets. These are cases that have a set timeline to be completed. They have to be completed, or it's recommended that they be completed within a year. One thing that we're seeing in the San Diego Immigration Court, and we're hoping to get more information to see if this is a national trend, a lot of these families that are on these faster paced, more rapid dockets are actually Haitian families. So there's an incredible need for representation on either asylum or potentially TPS to see if they're eligible for temporary protected status. So that's what we're seeing at the border with the Commission on Immigration and our justice, our immigration justice project.
Thank you, Nicole. So let's dig then more deeply into the current state of immigration law. And for that, I'm going to turn to Christina, because we know that former President Trump, whenever he spoke of the border, both in terms of the language that he used, in terms of the policies that he adopted, spoke of it almost like an open wound that was only carrying disease and misery into the US. But when President Biden went for office, sometimes he garnered headlines by using the stories of the deportation of Haitian children who were sent back by mistake. So I want to basically talk a little bit about whether or not there has been a change, because the situation that both Galen, Nicole, and Adonia described seems to cry for change. And I'm asking you, Christina, with the work in which we're engaged, what steps can be taken to redirect US policies with respect to Haitian nationals? Is that even a possibility? Is there any room for legislative reforms, both at the local level, at the national level? And if so, what are they?
Yes, so unfortunately, so I have good news and bad news. So fortunately, TPS was redesignated rather than just extended. So we have opened an opportunity for many folks who arrived after 2010 to be eligible for this form of relief. And we'll talk a little bit more about what exactly the benefits of TPS are. But for folks who are physically present in the United States in August, sorry, the dates did change, in August, are eligible for temporary protected status, and in theory are protected from deportation and are able to settle and make a life into the United States during the designation period for the next 18 months. However, on the other hand, we have seen this administration continue deportations, as Geraldine shared at the top of this webinar. We have not seen any movement on family resettlement, reunification. We haven't seen, Congress, there have been 4 bills introduced into Congress in terms of immigration reform that potentially could benefit the Haitian population. However, those are pretty much stalled in Congress. But there are two areas of opportunity still. So the first is that there's currently a push in Congress right now to include legalization of folks with TPS, deferred action for childhood arrivals, as well as essential workers, to actually have a path towards citizenship, a path towards legalization, knowing that Haitians are a significant portion of the TPS recipient population, and many are essential workers and DACA recipients. This budget reconciliation maneuver is an exciting opportunity, and really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to legalize a large swath of our community. On the other, there is an opportunity for advocacy around reinstating the family reunification parole program. Mm-hmm. So if there were 2 advocacy asks that you could engage with right now in terms of your legislators, your Congress people, even engaging your municipal elected officials. For example, our mayor of Miami-Dade County has written op-eds and released public letters in support of both the budget reconciliation process, the family reunification, the need for family reunification, the need to stop deportations. So know that it's not just in the hands of your Congress folks, and it's not just in the hands of the Biden administration, but there are action items that your state and local elected officials can do to demonstrate their support for the Haitian community in order for the Department of Homeland Security and the Biden administration to take executive action, take some administrative policies, and will make administrative changes to their policies and practices at CBP and ICE, as well as getting Congress to pass legislation which can actually change the law.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm sorry, thank you, Christina. Nicole, turning to you now, I know that you've already discussed earlier as part of an answer to a prior question, certain issues that Haitians in particular face. And I know Geraldine also talked a little bit about that. And Christina mentioned, and you mentioned also, TPS and Asylum, but on the assumption, and I know that's true, that there are a lot of non-immigration lawyers in the audience. I was hoping in sort of a couple of sentences, if possible, you could give us a brief tutorial as to what exactly is Asylum, what exactly is TPS, how they differ or how they're similar, how they intersect and how they don't intersect. I know it's a heavy lift because it's a complicated area of law, but I'm hoping to learn myself.
I think you could teach me, but okay, fair. No, I appreciate the question. One thing is I just put into the chat a link to a letter that was signed by 344 organizations right after the earthquake a few weeks ago in Haiti, or about a month ago in Haiti, that follows on a lot of what Christina's demands were for what the Haitian community needs. And this was a letter written to the Biden administration. So that gives, I think, a bit of a boilerplate or a blue sort of an idea of what we need. So asylum. The reason we keep mentioning asylum is sort of one of the best ways in order for Haitians to be able to get into the United States. It is for somebody who is. It's really very difficult to get asylum for anybody, but particularly Haitians. It's for if there is a personal persecution against them, and there's a credible fear of them returning to Haiti because of that persecution. So what they call generalized violence, such as there was an earthquake and there is gang violence there, and they were robbed, there was gangs, that generally does not constitute gang violence. Does not generally constitute asylum protected grounds. So it has to be because they're involved in politics, because as sort of a protected category, because they were a victim of gender-based violence. We can sometimes win those cases because of discrimination of religion or LGBTQ status or something like that. So it has to fit in one of these buckets in order for them to qualify for asylum. If they do, then that will allow them, it goes through years of process, but that will allow them to have a pathway to permanent residence and to citizenship. So it is sort of the holy grail, what we're after. With temporary protected status, that is what the government, the US government has the authority, the discretion to be able to designate a country for temporary protected status in the aftermath of a natural disaster like this earthquake, or because of an armed conflict or some other, what they call extraordinary but temporary conditions. So for Haiti in 2010 was designated for temporary protected status because of the 2010 earthquake that killed over 200,000 people. It was redesignated effective August 3rd, 2021 because of the ensuing sort of political violence and the assassination of the president, et cetera. So that was actually before the earthquake. What that allows, it does not provide for a pathway to permanent residence or citizenship, but it does allow work authorization on a temporary basis. And it also allows for protection against deportation. So it gives you sort of documents. It makes you documented as opposed to undocumented. It's on a temporary basis. It was designated for an 18-month period, but it is at the sort of discretion of the administration to renew it, which they review every 18 months or so. And so hopefully this is something that can last for a while. And as Christina mentioned, there are some bills pending that could, for those who already have TPS, not the new folks that have come through, but for those that were designated with TPS in 2010 or 11, these bills would allow them a pathway to legal permanent resident, which they otherwise wouldn't have unless they married a US citizen or were able to do it under some other way. What else, Anderson? What else can I explain? And please add if I missed anything. Oh, you're on mute.
I think it would be unfair for me to ask you to do more. You've given us a very, very good review of the system, but I do want to sort of dig a little bit more deeply into this TPS question by turning a little bit to Christina and asking her to walk us through the former president's attempt to end it, which prompted, I believe, challenges by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Can you tell us, what happened, what prompted that litigation, and what was the end point of it?
So first, the litigation is ongoing. So there were very public comments regarding calling Haiti a S-hole country, which was actually, very famous. And at the same time that there were these very public comments by President Trump, there were also moves by the administration to terminate TPS as a program wholesale, regardless for all countries, really leaving not only Haitians stranded, but many recipients had been the recipients of temporary protected status for more than 20 years with no legal recourse once their work authorization and temporary protected status expire. And so there were legal challenges to the validity and authority of the Trump administration to actually terminate the program. It has worked its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. It is still pending additional litigation. However, the judge in the case has said that for now, there is an extension for all recipients who are involved in that litigation to still maintain their work authorization as the case continues. And I will pass it to the legal folks to be able to provide a little bit more legal context, but that's my advocacy perspective.
Well, let me understand, just to clarify, perhaps the audience might also appreciate clarification. So if I understand correctly, the former temporary protected status from 2010 that had been extended, the Trump administration attempted to end it, and a judge sort of basically kept the status quo. But if I understand correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, that the Biden administration has issued a new TPS based on the most recent earthquake. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. And so there was two cases. There's a number of cases, the NAACP case. There's also, Haitians were protected under two court orders, one out of the Ninth Circuit and one out of the Seventh Circuit. The Ninth Circuit is called the Ramos case, and that involved TPS for not just Haiti, but for a number of other countries like Honduras, like Nepal, and El Salvador. And then there was a Sage case, which was out of New York court that went to the Second Circuit. Both of those appellate courts enjoined Trump administrations trying to terminate TPS. For all of those countries, Sage is a Haitian individual, and that was just for Haiti. And under the pretext of both of them was that it violated not only the Administrative Act, but it also violated the Equal Protection Act, because Trump's termination of TPS in both of those circumstances, but the record is very clear in the Haiti circumstance, was because of racism. It was all the terrible comments that we heard that I won't repeat today about Haiti and other African countries. And so the court then held this was racist, and so they they enjoined Trump's termination of TPS. So they were still under. There became a bit of a difficulty though, because before the Biden administration redesignated Haiti for TPS, it was unclear their work authorization, their EADs, were to expire on October 4th of this year, and it was unclear what to do. Just last week, the Biden administration issued another Federal Register notice that extended for a 15-month period the work authorization for those who had previously had TPS. Why is that important? Because the backlog for TPS is up to a year to actually, if you send in your application today, it could take up to a year for the administration to process the TPS application, process the fee waiver if you can't pay the $545 it costs to get your work authorization and TPS, which most cannot afford, especially if they've just come across the border. And thirdly, to get the work authorization. So all this, I'm saying this as if it's just sort of rolling out and makes perfect sense. Thank you, Biden administration. But this is a lot of work from Christina, her office, from, Gerline, from our office, in trying to get this to be able to protect Haitians as much as possible so they don't lose their jobs.
Thank you. Well, I think this sort of primer that you've given us about immigration law about asylum practices, about TPS, is helpful to sort of go into the next part of the discussion, because, you know, I'm assuming there are a number of lawyers here listening to you that feel as I do, because I've always been intimidated by immigration cases because it seems to be such a horribly complex area of law. And Adonia, let me start with you. Given the complexity of these cases and given the truly high humanitarian stakes at play, do you think that a non-immigration lawyer can even begin to take on a case such as this as a volunteer?
That's a phenomenal question. And I know it can be really intimidating for all the immigration practitioners out there. You know that they say that immigration is as complex as tax. The code and the law can be very complex. But with that being said, there are a lot of amazing organizations on the ground, whether it's Haitian Bridge Alliance, whether it's the Immigration Justice Project. There's so many organizations, Pro Bar. There are organizations that do provide mentorship and support and resources. Some organizations will co-counsel a case with you. So it is intimidating. But with that being said, you know, it's a matter of connecting with the right organization and the right resources to have that support, to get the continuing legal education, to have the resources, to have somebody that you can ask questions to. And if you're not quite ready for that case, you know, there's a lot of lighter touch opportunities. There's ways to do advice and counsel potentially. There's ways to get involved in the clinics, which I want Christina to talk about that, because the work that Christina and everybody is doing on this is phenomenal. So that's a way for people that want to get a little bit of exposure that aren't quite ready for a full case. There's a variety of opportunities. You don't have to jump in day one on a case. But with that being said, there is a need. You could do a request for a release from detention or a bond. Those are less involved cases. That isn't necessarily a full asylum case. There's ways to prepare people for credible fear interviews. There's a lot of different ways. And if it's something that interests you, do not be intimidated. Do not be afraid. I'm happy to connect you with organizations that can help you get involved.
Thank you, Adonia. Christina, let me turn to you, since Adonia opened the door for me. I understand that your organization, the Center for New Americans, run a TPS clinic. Can you tell us what exactly is a TPS clinic, where they're located, how they're structured, and is there a way for non-immigration lawyers to contribute and to help with that work of those clinics?
Definitely. So we host free group processing events that we call clinics, where we're able to bring together pro bono attorneys, trained legal and non-legal volunteers. Other trained legal volunteers would be law students and paralegals and BIA accredited representatives, for example, as well as staff from partner or community-based organizations, in order to complete as many applications as possible in a 1 to 3 day event. So currently, due to COVID, our clinics have taken place online using Zoom. So what we do is we have non-legal and non-legal volunteers on the front end be able to prepare an applicant for their appointment that takes place on Zoom. We make sure that they meet the basic eligibility requirements, have the correct documentation and evidence needed, as well as screen out anyone who may have a particularly complex case. So we know, for example, folks who may have lived in Chile for 3 years and whose residence in Chile has not expired yet. That's a person who needs to go have a one-on-one application assistance and actually have legal representation for the duration of their case, versus just having a qualified attorney screen and complete their application. So for the more straightforward cases, regardless of ability to pay, we are able to provide a legal assessment, form preparation, and then also help them compile their final package and send it off to USCIS. One of the things that we are very fortunate to do, due to our legal partnerships with HIAS and with with ABA, the ALA, all of the acronyms, ALA, as well as Catholic Legal Services, is actually provide G28s for these applications that are completed during the clinic. Normally, for naturalization, where we do a similar effort, we do not do G28s, but because we want to be able to notice the trends or in requests for evidence, the processing delays and any other data points, we want to make sure that we're holding people's hand through the entire process until they do receive their TPS. And so we not only are having this event, which is beneficial for the community, we also provide CLE trainings for for non-immigration attorneys, as well as immigration attorneys that may have never completed a TPS application. We do not only a 101 version, but a 201 version with special topics for us to, depending on the country, because we do TPS assistance for all of the designated countries, we're able to take a deeper legal dive into what some of the legal complexities may be. So if you are an attorney,
so can I ask you a follow-up question, Christina, because I think my ears pricked up when you said something. I just want to make sure I didn't mishear you. I understand that if a non-immigration lawyer who's not already partnered with you through an organization shows up and sends you an email or calls you, you said that you will provide training on various aspects of what you do. Did I hear correctly that your training permits them to obtain CLE credits?
The magical word CLE. Yes, free CLE training, I would add.
Free CLE credits nonetheless.
Yes.
Wow.
The commitment is that you complete at least 2 volunteer shifts. The volunteer shifts are 2 hours, and you can pick the days with which you complete them. But you're able to actually receive the training for your continuing education credits.
Okay. So then my next question about this part of the conversation goes to Gerlin and also Nicole. We can start with Gerlin and then Nicole can jump in. It's about, what about non-lawyers? Obviously, Gerlin, you spend a lot of time on the border. Clearly, there's a great deal of need for specialty help. Clearly, there's a need for other volunteer work. But if a non-lawyer wants to support your work, in what way can they do so?
Thank you so much. As we say in Haiti, un pile main chay palou, which means many hands lighten the load. I myself, I'm not an attorney. I have a technical background in system engineering, and this whole border thing was not something I was even interested in. As an immigrant myself, I was privileged enough to get on a plane, go to New York, although extremely difficult time to adjust to life in the United States. But this whole asylum seeking and refugee and the pain and the suffering that people are going through was foreign to me. So I say, if I can be involved, if I can do it, anyone can do it. From translation, we need extreme help needed for translation interpretation. For report, as you see, we've been putting a lot of papers together, a lot of reports. We need folks to help us, in that regards as well. To push, to bring awareness. If you are on social media, just a tweet or retweet of the issues that we are dealing with will help bring awareness to what's going on. We are in need for people to help us to continue to maintain our website, that because of the amount of work we do, we have not had the time to even look at our websites for the past 6 years, right? So it doesn't matter if it's just a tweet, or I've seen people putting in the chat, how can we support people in Haiti? Right now, we have a direct cash assistance program to provide support for directly impacted communities in Haiti. We don't work with the third parties. Whatever we give it directly to that person, to that family, to bury their loved ones, to relocate, to find shelter, to get food in a dignified manner. So honestly, whatever your expertise is, or no expertise at all, we welcome you. We actually invite you to join us in this fight for freedom, justice, liberation, and love.
Thank you, Gerlin. Did you want to add anything, Nicole?
Sure. Also, also to say, I'm not an immigration lawyer either. I've never taken an immigration class in law school. And a year ago, I knew almost nothing about immigration. I'm a human rights lawyer who lived in Haiti for 8 years and understand that country very well. But I had heard about these horrors that were happening at our border when I was living in Haiti, and wanted to get involved, and don't speak Spanish very well and don't know immigration. So I just assumed this wasn't for me. And yet it is, right? And yet now I've learned everything. I only say that as anybody can get involved in this movement, and it is really, really exciting. And we need new perspectives, and we need your skills. I was an ERISA labor lawyer. You'd be surprised where your skills can apply. And so we need help, as Garlene mentioned, writing reports. Something that's really fun for sort of young lawyers, associates is doing interviews with folks in detention. We can provide interpreters. I think it's really good with interview skills. I mean, there's a lot of work that can be done. And so, feel free, obviously, to reach out. And another thing, actually, in terms of the social media, the letter that I put together, I put in the chat, that is something we constantly need support. I mean, as Garlene mentioned, there was a deportation this morning. What that means is we are on the horn with everybody we know in Washington, including Congress members themselves, to put together advocacy. And this is dire. So congressional advocacy, writing to and that sounds silly, right, to your congressperson, but for folks who have connections, and maybe that's your work, and or getting your organizations to sign on to these letters that we're putting, is hugely influential. And you never know. Actually, it's interesting. There are some certain states like Kentucky, South Carolina, where there are a lot of groups that go to Haiti and do work, and they have a big solidarity with Haiti. And so, we need people all over the country in all pockets to be supporting this sort of for fair and just immigration policies for Haitians.
Thank you. One last question before we move on and open the floor for audience questions. And that is to you, Adonia. I understand that the ABA provide joint sponsorships for TPS clinics. Can you tell the audience a bit more about that?
Sure. I should have said in my introduction, this issue is extremely important to me because I'm actually a Florida transplant, and used to work very closely with Christina on these events, and they're very special to me. So the ABA Commission on Immigration is sponsoring these events, partnering on these events. We're seeking to recruit both attorneys and law students, interpreters, anybody that wants to learn more about this. We encourage you to sign up. As has been stated previously, you will receive training, you'll receive support. I did see a question in the Q&A about law students. I know we love law students. There are legal captains that oversee the completion of the cases and provide final review. So there is supervision that occurs on every single case. So I encourage you, if you're interested, the link has been provided in the chat, and we're happy to email it out to the attendees afterwards. But essentially, this is a way to get involved. As mentioned earlier, there's some folks that may be a little bit nervous about taking full-on representation, but this is a great way to get started, get involved in the issue, learn more, and then take that next step and provide some direct representation.
May I add something very quickly? One of the things that we provide is trainings on country conditions for attorneys in firms and whomever needs that. That is one of the very good programs that we partner with many different organizations where we provide country conditions, as Adonia was mentioning, for people who are a bit timid from taking Haitian cases, but we provide that support. We don't just give you a case and we disappear. We work with you to make sure that you are successful in providing proper representation for those clients. So we will love to, through ABA, provide those trainings for all participants as well.
Thank you. So I know we're doing very well on time, since it's important that we also end on time. So we've reached a point of the program where we want to open the floor for audience questions. Carla, I don't know if you're able to help. I know there's been a number of comments that were put in the chat earlier during the course of the conversation, but I'm not entirely sure whether or not these were just comments or whether there are any questions that have been teed up yet. But I'm happy to take up and sort of pass on to the panel whatever questions have been teed up.
One question is involving how Haitians flee or leave the country. And the question is involving, asking whether Haitians primarily flee from Cuba or, from Haiti to Florida. And I think someone mentioned during the panel that a lot of Haitians are, coming up through the border, going through the 3-month journey to the southern border. And can any of the panelists address the different migration paths of Haitians and why there are, this differentiation between, crossing from Florida to Haiti and, taking the longer journey by land?
I think any of us could take this, but I'm happy to. So, traditional migration patterns have been have been through plane, have been through Miami or whichever place, and people have overstayed their visa, and that's how they may be undocumented here, or that they just come here on a visa. It's very, 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 very difficult to get a visa to the United States unless you have an immediate family member, and even if you do, you still don't get them. I've had clients who I've applied for visas 5 times, and they've not been successful. So as a result, a lot of Haitian migrants chose to migrate to Brazil or Chile after the earthquake because they opened up processes for being able to get temporary humanitarian visas that allowed work authorization. So that's why we saw this whole this shift in migration pattern in those years. It's not just Haitians who do that journey. There are a lot of migrants, particularly from Africa, from Cameroon, from Ethiopia, from the DRC, also some from India, sort of all over the world have been taking this journey because that is where they can land physically, is in Brazil or Chile, and then come all the way up through all of those countries into Mexico, into the US-Mexico border. So there are still some, of course, that do come in through planes. There are some boats still that are coming and are being intercepted by the Coast Guard. Occasionally, maybe one makes it, I don't know. But the boats we're seeing, I think there was a boat this week that was stopped, a boat last week. There are still some boats, but generally they're coming by foot.
The next question that's been put on the chat, and again, this is to any member of the panel, and it picks up on Nicole's discussion about the migration route through South America, including Brazil and Chile. And many folks are interested if the panelists could explain what, if any, challenges these migrants, particularly Black migrants, in particular Haitians, face when they land in Chile, when they land in Brazil, or any other South American country. In other words, is there a particular form of racism above and beyond the safety concerns that you talked about that they face?
Absolutely. And that's one of the issues we are seeing. So, for example, for Brazil, growing up, we all know that Brazil is one of the countries outside of Africa that has the most number of Black people, right, descendants of Africans. Yet the systematic racism in Brazil is extreme. Now you put in perspective the fact that somebody's an immigrant, Black immigrant at that, and they continue to be subject to that racism in Brazil. And in Chile, we've had countless reports of the anti-Black racism and how the Haitian migrants in particular are being treated as less than, refuse to get services, have been killed and beaten and attacked, all over the place. So unfortunately, when we talk about anti-Black racism, it's not an American only thing, it's not a US thing. And as those people continue to travel in their Black bodies, I think Nicole mentioned before, there is no escaping. If a Haitian person goes into Colombia, the moment they arrive, they know they don't belong. And what we are seeing in Guatemala and in Mexico is the fact that there's no escape, right? When we look into our colleagues and brothers and sisters from Central America, when they arrive in Mexico, I've spoken to them, they can blend in. If something is happening, they can switch their accent and fit into the Mexican community, but a Haitian cannot do that because, a Cameroonian and Ethiopian, we cannot do that as we travel in our Black bodies. That is the target. So when we think about the systematic racism, that is not just in Haiti, in the United States, that is a global issue that as those people cross those 10 countries, the amount of murders and rapes and abuse that have been reported is extreme. And we literally get secondhand trauma from seeing, young women and men getting raped on the way during the journey, getting killed, getting shot, because there is no escaping for them. Those people have absolutely no protections at home. They have no protection during their journey. They have no protection at the US-Mexico. They have no protection in detention. They have no protection upon deportation. They have nothing.
I guess then it goes to the next question that comes from the audience. It touches both about what you're saying, Gerlin, and also about what Nicole mentioned earlier in terms of the basis for obtaining asylum. And an audience member says that for Haitians who stop in other South American countries before coming to the US, right? What sort of persuasive evidence have you found in your work? Are you able to use to overcome barriers to resettlement in the US? In other words, if they make the journey to South America, does that journey itself provide you with a basis for obtaining asylum for them? Or is that not making a difference?
Actually, I think Adonia, Christina, and Nicole all mentioned that there's also this firm resettlement, third country firm resettlement that is in play. I will let them give more, details on that. But Christina,
anyone in the panel
April,
anyone can jump in.
I can just say really quickly, it is a major challenge. So actually what we're seeing is in a lot of our screening, we have many, many clients that lived in Chile. And so now what we've done is we've bifurcated the paths of engagement to say, when did your residency expire or not? Because it's going to be an uphill battle to establish firm resettlement if they still have a valid work permit in Chile. And the additional question is if they had children born in those countries as well. So I'll pass it to the attorneys. I also am not an attorney, but those are the challenges we're seeing.
That was the issue I was going to address. We are seeing increasing numbers of Haitian families where their children were born in the third country, which is, first of all, having to get documentation about Haitian nationality, trying to work with the consulates to get that information. That's an added level. You need to keep in mind too that this firm resettlement is needs to be raised by the government, and it's something that you have to rebut. It's a presumption that the government is going to raise. And in the context of TPS, on the temporary protected status applications, there are several questions that ask about where did you go, how long were you there, and we're still waiting to see how the administration is actually going to treat processing of these cases. I think it's really important that attorneys, if you have clients that have lived substantial amounts of time in a third country, start gathering that information. I know in the Q&A and in the chat, Nicole posted CGRS's information, which is is incredibly helpful. Accessing those news articles about the treatment of Haitians in Chile. There's one for Chile and one for Brazil. So important, and to be prepared to rebut that presumption if raised by the government. But like I said, in the context of TPS, we're waiting to see how it's going to be treated, which is also so important that Christina and the collaborative of organizations working on TPS are entering appearances and doing G28s, because they're going to be able to see if any of these issues come up.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And we sort of handle it as a three-prong approach. The first prong is the written materials. In any asylum case, you're going to provide, and the term has come up that Geraldine mentioned, country conditions. So country conditions is really educating the judge on what is happening, in this case, often in Haiti, why they can't return to Haiti. If what they're saying, does that have context? Does that make sense what they're saying? But also, CJRS has worked with a number of experts from Chile and Brazil who can serve as expert witnesses in an asylum case on the country conditions in Brazil or Chile, wherever they lived, or Venezuela, and can explain the context of why it was very difficult for them to resettle there. So that's sort of two things. One is the documents that establish that, Human Rights Watch reports, US State Department reports, those kinds of things, as well as then expert witnesses that can do this. The third thing really is really good interviews with the client, because you would be surprised over and over and over again. I hear from clients pretty gruesome stories about things that happened to them, particularly in Chile, but also in Brazil. I mean, and just like one little quick story was somebody said, we had to leave because we lived near a plaza, and men kept coming to our house and threatening to sexually assault our daughter, who turned 16 years old. And we couldn't go to the police because the police don't help Haitians. They turn us away. There was nowhere to hide. There was nothing for us. We couldn't go anywhere, and we didn't want our daughter to be sexually assaulted. So we left for the United States. So I think in a lot of cases, you're going to hear that they themselves were victims of something that made them realize this country isn't for me. This isn't hospitable, and there's no legal system here to protect me. And those two together seem to be the winning combination. So we have gotten past that firm resettlement bar in a number of cases, but it is tricky for all the reasons that everybody has described.
Okay. I think there's a general question in the chat that I'm hoping any of the panelists can address, namely that, do you find that in your work, both in seeking to help migrants who are Haitians and in seeking to translate and give voice to their stories to various tribunals before which you have to appear, that there are barriers that are presented by the intersection of race, class, gender, and culture? For example, coming from being Haitian myself, I know sometimes there can be a certain cultural norm against sort of speaking the truth of your family's condition. There can be a certain cultural norm about confessing your real need for help. There can be a certain cultural norm about confessing your particular background, economic background, etc. So I'm wondering whether or not you ever encounter that in your attempt to help, and what do you do? How do you break through that barrier? I don't know if that question makes sense.
Let me quickly say something, and thank you so much, Mr. Anderson, for.
It's just Anderson. That's my first name.
Anderson. One of the things that we see from the beginning is the fact that, as you mentioned, so many issues are taboo within the Haitian community. We started seeing a lot of issues with LGBTQ members. And where they will, you have to become so comfortable with the person before they share that with you. So one thing we are seeing a lot is the fact that One, people do not understand the asylum system. They are fleeing, they are in danger, they need protection, they come and ask for protection. If you ask them anything about asylum, they don't know what you're talking about. So therefore, it is extremely difficult. And Haitian are storytellers, right? You are able to find what kind of cases we have by being comfortable enough in having that relationship and conversation to say, aha, you have a political case. Aha, it's an LGBTQ case. Aha, it's a domestic violence case, because those things are not things that we culturally discuss. And I think also that is an extreme barrier for Haitian, for an asylum seeker from Haiti, because attorneys don't have the time to sit with them and understand their cases. Is the numbers, right? How many people did I serve today? None of them qualified because none of them told them they were fleeing violence due to LGBTQ, or somebody from the political party come in and did something to them. And the words that they use, does it translate, to some of the legalities of things in the United States? When somebody tells you that a gang came and they did that, we are thinking it is a regular gang. No, they are talking about somebody that is a political person that comes and literally did something to them. So that is a political case, right? But until we have the means to really dig deep into each stories, we have this added layer of difficulties, just to point to what Anderson mentioned, but hopefully the other folks can add to that. But don't be afraid. If you're an attorney, don't be afraid to take those cases. That's why we are here, to work with you, to go through the weave to make sure that we are successful in winning asylum and protection for those people.
Mm-hmm. I think, to piggyback off of what Gerline said, it's really about trust and cultural competency. And so this is why community organizations and volunteering is so important, because we need to be able to take the time to build trust with the client. And that should be for any client, regardless of the issue. But we also know, just speaking from our community's perspective, and I would also say that a lot of the terminology just does not connect. The terminology that we're using to engage them and trying to make an assessment on what their situation is completely foreign to them. And there are buzzwords that folks are kind of trained to use because of like Haitian radio and TV and what they heard so-and-so's experience has been, but they don't have a true deep understanding of what it is to get asylum, or to be a refugee, or to, there is a deeper political education that is required, which I think the organizing work is so important and is such a crucial part of engaging in this community that is not quite separate. So I don't separate the organizing and the political education from the legal service, because we actually need to take the time to educate and engage our community, for them to have an understanding of the system, of what they're committing to, what they're attesting to, right? Because a lot of the times also what will happen is, oh, well, I identified that this is the situation that you have, and you yourself, the client, do not understand that. And then later on, we'll say something completely contradictory to what the assessment was. And I'll let Adonia hop in on that point.
Oh, I knew where you were going on that, Christina. And I think it leads into another problem that we hinted at the very, very top of the webinar, which is the unauthorized practice of law and notarios. When people, when we're not able to actually provide the time, and community organizers and folks don't have the time to connect with the community and really orient people about the process, about how it works, you see an increase of people going to non-attorneys who may be just submitting applications, and people may not understand what's being submitted on their behalf. So that's that taking the time and that educational piece is really, really, really important, in my opinion.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Nicole, you wanted to add?
one just sort of extra plug how this plays out. So there was a case that I was called on, so I'm an expert witness, an expert country condition witness for Haiti in asylum cases. And so an attorney who's a fantastic attorney really built up a rapport with this young Haitian man, and called me and said, we lost our case and I don't know why, and can I bring you in? I want to appeal. And so there was something about the gentleman's story that didn't make sense. And the gentleman had been driving in a car, he'd been the chauffeur, his uncle was shot and killed by a group of people while the client was driving, and then cars came up and shot his uncle. And I said, there's something about this case, like, why are they so after this uncle? This has to be politically affiliated. It went all the way through the asylum system, the immigration judge, and they lost because they found no nexus to politics. When I reviewed this, I said, I know this country, like I know there's a political issue here. So I said, would you be okay? I've never done this before. Would you be okay if I spoke with your client? And he said, of course, please. So I spoke with the client. It was on the second time, maybe even the third, but I think the second time I spoke with the client, and I said, who was behind this? There's something you're not saying. Who was behind this? And he said, oh, it was a senator that was behind it and had him killed. And there was a whole reason why it was the senator that I won't go into. And I said, bingo, now we have a case. And he didn't mention the senator because he thought this was all public information, and that if he were deported, the senator would know he ratted him out in an immigration in a US court. So it's like these things where that rapport really is the difference between winning a case and losing a case. And I just want to give an extra plug. These cases are, fun is a terrible word, but we're lawyers, we're nerds. These cases are so much fun to win, and you can win them. And I have to say that I've won every asylum case that I've been a country conditions expert on. And it's not because I'm fabulous. It's because these are legitimately good claims. And with some proper legal strategy and the right questions to the client, you can figure out how to create that nexus. So I really recommend when you take these cases, because they really are fun. And when you take the cases, reach out to individuals that can help you do the legal strategy. I mean, in 15 minutes, I can look at a declaration and I can let you know how to put together the legal strategy of the case. What is that nexus to tie it to? And so please, reach out to us for assistance.
Thank you, Nicole. We're almost at the end of our time. I want to take a couple of minutes to close, but before I do, there's one last question that came that I think is an important one that perhaps the panelists who have the information can answer by putting the information in the chat. And one person specifically wants to know whether or not there are any organizations based in Mexico near the border that are designed exist to help Asian migrants or Black migrants in general that could use support, financial or otherwise. So perhaps those of you who have that information, other than your own organizations, obviously, can do that, okay, in the chat. So I promised Carla that I would try very much to keep us on a schedule. I want to thank those of you who came for this free webinar. I would also like to express my deep gratitude to the panelists. I must tell you that as a lawyer who does civil rights work, I am in absolute awe at the work that you do. And as a Haitian who was born and raised in Haiti and came here only when I was 18, I am grateful beyond words. I'm grateful beyond words for the things that you do every day. I really am. So I want to thank you personally for that work. And I also want to thank you personally on behalf of the ABA for sharing your experiences. One last thing, on behalf of the ABA, the section of Civil Rights and Social Justice provide free seminars and resources for legal professionals and advocates nationwide. We hope that this helps you in your work. And again, if you can, please consider joining and becoming active in the ABA. You may do so, and I'm sure Carla will put it in the chat at mbar.org/CRSJ. Again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the panelists for inspiring us. And thank you personally from the bottom of my heart for all the work that you do.